Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Norma Nieto, and I'm the Director of Transformation and Marketing here at CEI. I'll be facilitating our Drive Innovation and Adoption with Human-Centered Design webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, this session is being recorded, and the download link to the recording will be shared with you afterwards. Second, we will have live Q&A at the end with our presenters. To ask a question, please use the question feature on your GoToWebinar control panel, usually found at the right side of your screen. You can use the question feature during the presentation as well if questions arise while you're watching. For any questions we can't get to in our live session today, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. Now, let's introduce our presenters for the day. First up, we have Russ Viesoff, our VP of Financial Services here at CEI. Russ has over 25 years of experience, or 27 as it says, in the technology industry in various capacities. He started out as a developer, and now he's a solutions delivery executive focused on helping financial services firms solve tough business problems through the smart use of technology, as well as strategy, design thinking, digital consulting, managed services, and strategic staffing. Our main presenter today is Justin Mercalde. He is the Senior Director of our Human-Centered Design practice here at CEI. Justin is an award-winning design thought leader with nearly 20 years of experience in various design, software engineering, and strategic leadership roles within multiple verticals. Justin is very adept at institutionalizing human-centered design and design thinking processes within Fortune 100 enterprises and improving operational effectiveness, efficiency, and their overall strategies. So Russ, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off.
Thanks, Norma, and thanks everyone for attending today. So as we get started, I just wanted to say a few words about human-centered design before I turn things over to Justin. So, across industries, human-centered design is a powerful and creative discipline that's used to help solve tough client problems and really define a vision for a path forward. It helps us focus on what's possible. And at CEI, we use human-centered design to help organizations build meaningful relationships with their customers. And we do this by helping our clients create differentiating and engaging customer experiences. And now I'd like to turn things over to Justin to talk more about how we do that. Justin?
Sure, thanks, Russ. I appreciate it. So we over at CEI, the Human-Centered Design Group here, have spent countless hours, specifically over about 5,000 hours in user interviews, design sprints, and testing. We've delivered about 38 human-centered design products that we've shipped for Fortune 1000 companies. And we've seen, as a really interesting metric, an average of 43% decrease on the user friction points and or errors within all of these solutions just by engaging human-centered design. Now, we do have an agenda here. I'd like to cover what is human-centered design for the folks that are new to it, our particular approach to human-centered design and innovation. We'd like to quickly review a case study for context and just putting it to practice. From there, we'd like to introduce, possibly where can you start to engage in human-centered design, and then open it up for a Q&A. So what is human-centered design? Really, it is an approach to problem solving, frankly, and more uniquely, it's involving the human perspective in all steps of the problem solving process. We need the context. We need to understand the context that the human's involved in to help our problem solving. And at its essence, that is human-centered design. Now, one thing I'd like to do is introduce something that we experience on a day-to-day basis pre-COVID in everyday life that aligns to human-centered design. A good example of that is the Norman door. A Norman door is essentially a terminology that is used to define any door that is difficult or confusing to use when the affordance isn't very clear on what it actually is supposed to do. For example, you have a staircase or an escalator, one's going down, one's going up. You go to the one that looks like it's going up to go up. Pretty simple. And it really taps into, our cognitive abilities that we've been trained since birth. Say, for example, turning a knob when approaching a door, or seeing a pull handle, we pull it, or when we see a push plate, we push. It's afforded just by observing it. However, the Norman door, as you can see here, is a very, very desirable visual form, is equated more than function in this example, more stylistic, but it doesn't give you the affordance of what am I supposed to do here? So you might run into the door thinking that you're going to push it, or you might end up pulling it when you should have pushed it. And you'll actually see some Band-Aids out in the wild where people actually have included a little nameplate to tell you, to guide you on what its function actually is, because it's not readily apparent. So this is a good example of human-centered design, maybe a poor example in terms of poor human-centered design in the wild today. So the investment of design, human-centered design at the solutioning phase, or at any phase for that matter, brings quantifiable results. Some in the world examples are Zillow actually boosted their conversion rate by 8% just by providing geographic context to the listings. It's StubHub, pre-COVID, actually had a 2.6% purchase rate lift by replacing a text link with just a button. It can be just that simple sometimes. And 2% or 2.6% of their overall traffic is a very large material number. And Bank of America actually increased their yield 45% just by taking a long, drawn out banking enrollment process from 1 step to 5 steps. Humans love smaller chunks. They feel more comfortable, and that is why you're seeing such an increased yield. Now, what does that mean at a very macro level? So here's an example of the design value index. Some folks out there might have seen this. This is commonly used, but this is, you can see quite a delta here. There's a delta of 211% performance increase by design-led companies shown in green compared to the normal S&P companies that aren't design-led. That's 211%. So that's, again, material difference in design-led companies. So what is our approach to human-centered design and innovation? We provide our following services. We chunk them up in this manner. An experience strategy, product design and delivery, and design ops and consulting. So experience strategy, if you're moving from left to right, is more, strategic based, kind of setting our goals, understanding what our goals are and getting better clarity on that. As it rolls down to the right, the product design and delivery is basically productizing or making a tactile delivery to a product that is basically informed by the strategy. And then design ops consulting is the operational side. Understanding how design is applied to agile and vice versa, and working alongside implementation teams to really increasing the velocity and the success factors that go into product delivery. So I'd like to jump into experience strategy. This is at a very, very high level of how we go about doing it. So from a human-centered design approach, we need to engage with the business. That is why we're here. We want to better understand what the business driver is. So our first focused lens is we basically evaluate, why are we standing in front of you, or why are we meeting with the business, right? There's a reason. And is it a cost factor? Is it a growth factor? Is it we want to compete better? So we establish those core drivers. Now, there are circumstances and situations where it's not just one of those. It could be one or two or possibly all three of them. But if we're trying to solve a problem, we need to apply some sort of lens, because we'll get lost. Again, if we think back to the 45% increased yield of Bank of America, we need to chunk things up. Humans respond better to chunking. And so, say for example, we see a situation where we'd like to focus on costs, but also growth is a very important thing to us. So one thing that would birth out of that would be internal efficiencies, right? So internal efficiencies is a bridge between both of those areas. And so what we'd like to do is we understand that internal efficiencies are very costly and could be very problematic from a cost perspective for companies or enterprises. But also growth could also exacerbate those cost issues. And those internal efficiencies will just become even bigger of a problem as growth occurs or acquisition occurs. So after we set that one lens, maybe say, for example, we're focusing on internal efficiencies. What we'd like to do is, again, apply another lens to kind of refine that idea and get a little bit more, an objective, right? And so one way we do that is by creating desired outcome statements, where we apply a direction, a metric, an object of control, and a contextual clarifier, right? So we need to set the direction, we need to set a certain metric or a numerical factor, something that can quantify a span of time or a span of something, the object that we're going to control, and the context around it, right? So say, for example, we're in the business of peanut butter and jelly, right? And so one thing that, we've actually taken some liberties on is moving this along and saying, hey, the direction is let's minimize it. We applied the metric, the time it takes to, say, for example, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. As you can see, we had a cost efficiency, right? Or a time efficiency as we initially had set that lens. And then we refined that, right? And so we're in the business of peanut butter and jelly, and now we're focusing on minimizing the time it takes to actually make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So now what we're going to do is one of our desired outcomes is to make things faster, which is meeting our initial goal at the prior lens. But now we have a little bit more context around it. It's making, and we're making sandwiches with our product, right? And we could also apply that in more predictable, optimal results where, say, for example, we have ownership in jelly. We want to minimize the likelihood the jelly doesn't make a mess, right? And so this is where the innovation actually begins. So say, for example, you've seen out in the wild where maybe I'm showing my age, but I know I remember whenever I was scooping jelly out of a large jar. You don't see that as common anymore. Now they have these squeeze tubes where you're actually controlling the application of the jelly, making less mess. This is probably, maybe at some point, they started that innovation process with this desired outcome statement. I know that Norma also mentioned to me that they had these Frustables, I think she called it, where they're actually a pod of peanut butter and jelly, where it doesn't make a mess at all, and it's kind of, you don't even have to worry about the application of it at all. So those would be two examples of more predictable, optimal results, allowing for innovation and competing against your competition in a better way, in a more innovative way. So the fun stage of the experience strategy is then applying the desirability factor, the human-centered design factor, right? This is all human-centered. But now we actually start the observations. Now we actually start the, putting context to it real time, right? So we start at the desirability factor, and I think there's an overall theme here is we need to make it more desirable for humans, for our customers, for our internal employees. And then what we try to do then is we get all these ideas, we formulate all these ideas, and after we apply all these lenses, we start formulating ideas that are more pointed and more refined. Then we further refine it with additional lenses within this third lens, master lens, is the viability factor. Does this make sense to our business? Is this something our business even wants to do, right? And then also the feasibility. Does our technology stack, allow for this? Is this something that's even feasible? Is it going to be too costly to manufacture some, die-cut pod maker that, eliminates the mess? Or do we have a manufacturer, for say, for example, with the peanut butter and jelly, that we can easily manufacture these squeeze tubes, right? And is the business even interested in going that route as an innovational route? So one of the crux of all product design and delivery. Now, this is something that's repeatable, again, in any area you're at, but more so aligned to the product design and delivery is the cone of uncertainty. This is something that we're asked on a pretty regular basis at CEI to say, how large do you think this engagement is? Well, if we're starting at the left-hand side, the cone of uncertainty, we don't know much about it, right? And so we can't come with an estimate that's extremely refined, and we feel the utmost confidence that it's within, a 2% range of being that, hitting that estimate number. But we're basically trying to take things down this cone, right? And so there are a certain treatment or a certain process that we like to do to get better clarity as we travel down the cone of uncertainty. This is some really solid areas, chunking again, as we travel down this path to get better clarity on either product or approach, anything. This is the process. Observations, we need to get context. Again, we can only evaluate something from an assumption. We just need to test those assumptions. We need to gather some information. So we do either interviews, we gather data points or metrics. If you have a pre-existing application, if you, again, have a pre-existing application, we want to do heuristic. We want to evaluate where you currently are. We're trained in such a way as human-centered designers that, we're going to only cherry pick the really good things out of it. We're not going to ever recreate what has been done before. We want to learn from that, and that heuristic allows that. Quotes and feedbacks, those types of things, quasi-interviews, but more so just kind of things that might be a pre-existing metric or something out there that maybe has been done by a marketing team. Contextual inquiry, this is huge. This is the real-time feedback where we're essentially a fly on the wall. We are allowed to understand and observe somebody in their space, in their environment, and watch them either fail or succeed, and why, in their real-world context of wherever they're using the application, whatever it may be. We're getting rich feedback in contextual inquiry. Competitive analysis too. Again, in the same line of heuristic review of a pre-existing product, we want to evaluate what the competition's doing, the greatness, the failures, and learn from those, right? This whole theme that you're seeing here is fail fast, right? So we're expecting to fail fast in this whole entire approach. From those observations, we gather themes and patterns, we cluster them, we generalize them, we get early insights, we get ideas of who's using it, right? So personifications, which typically apply to an external, more demographic-based, marketing-based product, or maybe we're in jobs to be done. Jobs to be done is a great way to evaluate internal processes and applications, and to really make sure that we're evaluating the right things when it comes to users of the system. And then concept mapping, where we need to understand our concepts, how they all fit together in an ecosystem. From that point, we have now got these themes and patterns that have basically formulated themselves from these observations. We're starting to see some commonalities, some generalizations and clusters. From those, we start asking ourselves, well, what does that mean, right? What is the perceptions, or how does this correlate to something, right? And this is where we start to formulate some insight. Provocations, perceptions and causes and needs are formed at this point. Those insights then turn into moments of opportunity, right? So this is where we start applying those initial lenses and filters to saying, okay, how does this align to the outcome statement? How does this align to why we're here that has been set by the business? So we have product focus. We evaluate prioritization. We formulate some additional statement starters to really get us geared up to get into the conceptualization phase. At this point, we can then start setting some KPIs and OKRs, and really start evaluating a workflow, and really trying to improve that. That leads us into conceptualization, the fun part where you get your hands dirty. Sketches, flow maps, storyboards, wireframes. And then what we sometimes try to do is, if there's a situation where maybe there's a competing idea, maybe an A and B idea, we try to visualize the vote internally, and then we allow the users to speak. We can get that right into the test phase. The test phase is we don't know what we don't know until we try to test it. Again, it's only an assumption until we start to test it with a prototype, a proof of concept, and we evaluate things with the user testing method. There are circumstances on a pretty regular basis where we probably got 75% right, but that 25% can be refined. This is so much cheaper to do it when it's on paper or whenever it's in a non-code format. There are some different differing approaches where we can do this real time in production, A/B tests in production, as this maturity model, maybe after we do a few different passes at it, and we can continue to evaluate that feedback and then pivot from it while we're in production. But that's a very, very aggressive style. Again, we at CEI understand a lot of these different techniques and styles and could adhere ourselves to it. But furthermore, these tests really provide us additional insights. Then we work our way back down probably a little bit quicker because we've already been through it once, and we're probably only at 25% rather than 100% initially to refine it. And then we test it again. And sometimes we do it a few times, but it's very, very cost effective to do it now than later on. Again, fail fast. And for the folks that might be familiar with the double diamond, that might look a little familiar, right? So double diamond approach is commonly thrown around in human-centered design and innovation. Really what you're looking at here is you're opening up your insight, you're opening up your ideas to gather a lot of different things on the first diamond. So diverging your thought process, and then you're converging as you start to establish those themes and patterns. Gathering the insights, and then you open back up for conceptualization, and then you tighten back up again during the testing process. So pretty interesting stuff. You hear probably a lot of people talking about the same thing, maybe different types of things, double diamond versus cone of uncertainty. They're all kind of saying the same thing. They're just different ways of conveying the process. So as we test out a lot of these features and ideas, we have a pretty good idea of what is success, right? But we understand that time to market is huge, right? And is key. And so we need to involve the business in some of the prioritization, right? So what we try to do is we try to take some of these concepts that have been tested and validated from the HED team, and we align that, and we start collaborating that with the business to set up like the product delivery phase. And so we commonly use a prioritization quadrant map. And as you can see, we see the value and the complexity, right? Very, very plainly displayed. And so in each quadrant, we can generalize if it's worthwhile or not making any sense to being done at this phase, where we have, as you can see, easy wins and strategic initiatives worth pursuing and revisiting later, and deprioritization. And you know, why would we ever want to deprioritize something that we've already tested? Well, whenever we start to involve the business and the technical folks, the low value and high complexity factor of it, there is no reason as a business that we should do some costly feature that provides a very minimal value, right? And so yes, we should deprioritize those features that have been found. But this phase allows for the technical folks as well as the designing folk and the business folk to have these discussions. Where do we take these from there, right? So the areas, the items, the features that we want to continue on with, we need to align to a backlog of how we're planning our plan of attack. And you might have heard some minimum lovable product or minimum viable product being thrown around in product delivery. This is essentially that, where release 1, we can say, okay, sprint 1, this is where we should focus, right? And then this is a great technique where we can possibly take some of those features that are put on a sticky note and then move those around, right? And in COVID days, we can do those virtually in virtual sticky notes. It's the same idea. And so we just basically move these around. As you can see from left to right, these are the sprints, and from top to bottom, those are the releases. And so we can really chart how some of these high-level features, how we're going to plan on delivering these to market. And this is a great tool to do so. So I think we covered a lot of different things here, but as you focus on product and design, we went through research and ideation, product definition, and product planning of those first 3 buckets. Now, how does that involve other groups, right? So operations and strategy, it's really interesting. Take a look at human-centered design. How does that feed into operations and strategy? Some of those observations and some of those insights and themes and patterns are being pumped directly into the operations and strategy for their insight. So that's why you're seeing about 2 of those chunks actually out ahead of operations and strategies, because some of those findings are pumped into them, which then feed back in as they continue to walk that along. The HCD group basically takes those thoughts and feelings and moves that context down the product side, right? So the product implementation side. And of course, the developing and testing of that product is then even further downstream. Here's an example of design ops and DevOps, right? So the design is typically out in front to some degree. I mean, some companies like a shorter runway and some like longer runways. It all depends on your comfortability as an enterprise, but essentially we have a backlog, right? Everybody was working from a list, and the design team's working from their initial list that feeds into the development cycle. So we have a design process and we have a development process from an operational standpoint. But the design team is here to keep the development team fed. And as you can see in the second and third column, and consecutively from that point on, there's a continual loop that's going on, which is the communication. This is very important, right? So there should never be a reason why design team is doing their own thing and development team is doing their own thing and they're never talking. There's so much value in bridging some of those gaps. There's only so much context you can give a development team on, acceptance or how something should be built. And if you will, a little bit of a QA process or a semi-QA process between the design and the development team within the sprint itself. And so this is why it's really important to understand the design ops and DevOps consulting process that we can help guide teams through, or just the general importance of teams doing it right. I believe Russ is going to engage on indicating how do we actually get started here in human-centered design. And so Russ, without further ado.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate that. Again, thank everyone for their time. So you heard Justin talk a lot about the human-centered design process. And we really use workshops to help clients think around corners and solve complex challenges, right? He mentioned divergent and convergent thinking. And this is really a learning process, for all parties involved. We're establishing a baseline of how things work today and where challenges and opportunities might exist. We'll use divergent thinking to involve all areas of the business, drive innovation and vision for product delivery. We'll leverage convergent techniques, right, to begin to establish the right objectives and key results to deliver the outcomes that your business desires. Share ideas about new processes and tools. Work through how to effectively bring best-in-class human-centered design techniques into your development processes. And then really bring a focus to developing and engaging customer experience that drives business ROI. And this focus is really informed by the outcomes you see at the bottom there, through observations, themes, and patterns and insights that we gather, throughout this process. Next slide, please. Thanks, Justin. So, we talked about product delivery here, but as Justin mentioned, human-centered design is really a way to approach complex problems, and it applies to many areas. It could be strategy, it could be process or workflow, it certainly could be software development. And they can be tailored to cover, breadth or depth in a problem space. And what we'd like to challenge you with is, as we begin to close out this session today, I'd like you to challenge us. Take Justin and his team for a test drive to help you define or refine your vision and approach to a product, process, or strategic challenge. And if you're interested in doing so, you can reach out to me at the email that you see listed here, or you can contact your CEI account executive. And again, I thank you for your time. And with that, I'd like to turn things back to Norma.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. That was really helpful. We are now moving into the Q&A portion of the webinar. We do have some questions from the audience, so I'll start with those. The first question is, I would love to know the metric you use to measure user friction points.
Yeah, no, great question. There is a qualitative and quantitative method to do so. There are plenty of softwares and tools out there to quantify what those are. Optimal Workshop, among many others. based upon the constraints that we find ourselves in from the business and just the situational aspect. So yes, there are ways of basically taking that qualitative feedback into a quantitative state, or and suggestedly, we do both because it's a powerhouse when you get both. The qualitative aspect, where maybe we can say there's a lot of expression that occurs, especially in person. So it's been difficult to do that in a COVID date. But there are ways around that. It just adds another challenge there to evaluate someone's expressions, right? So we can get a lot of different things from feedback loops, reports, metrics, those quantitative measures, and then apply a qualitative aspect to it. So maybe digging in, doing a secondary research spike on that to get a better insight as to why it was a problem, why we're seeing these spikes, get a little bit more rich feedback or color on that. And then those two together are, like I said, just a powerhouse. So there are tools of kind of getting both and processes of getting both, but that's highly suggested from an ideal approach.
Great, thank you, Justin. Next question. I love the elegance of the desired outcome statement. I've been working on problem statements with my team for the last few weeks, and they're a heck of a lot longer and more complex. Can you speak to customer targeting in the outcome statement? Is a target customer specified in a higher level statement, like you've already identified who's making the PB&J sandwiches, or do you create something more generally applicable to multiple users?
Good question again, and thank you. So again, the chunking of information, because when things become too crazy complex and too deep, we kind of check out, right, as humans, right? So one thing I would highly suggest is just applying another lens. If you need to apply another lens, it's highly suggested that you do so, right? We want to combat any risk, and that one risk is things getting too big, right? So one thing that I would suggest is after we identify one of the core drivers, then we can do a smaller segment or possibly two different efforts during those desired outcome statements. So we can say, okay, what kind of segment are we going to focus on here? So it's basically just further refining that, going down that funnel, if you will, to making it a little bit smaller and more manageable. And so we don't get kind of lost in the weeds. And hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Justin. I don't think we have any more questions at this time. Let's see. Anyone else? Last call? Okay, I think we're good. All right. So we're getting to the end of our webinar. So before we would close out, I'd actually take a moment to remind you of the rest of our remaining series of technical webinars for the summer. Next Thursday, we have Building a Cloud Center of Excellence in Azure. Then 3 weeks from today, on August 27th, we have Automate Employee Workflow with Robotic Process Automation. So we'd like to thank those of you who've already signed up for the rest of the series, and for those of you who only attended today might be interested in joining the next ones, we'll include the links for registration for those in our follow-up email. In closing, we appreciate everyone's time and hope you found the content valuable. As follow-up, we'll send you an email with the link to the recording that you can use to review if you would like to look at the content again. And we'd like to, of course, thank our wonderful presenters today, Russ Visoff and Justin Mercalde. If you want to contact either of them for more information, additional questions, or you're ready to get started in bringing in a more human-centered design approach into your organization, please feel free to contact them. Have a great afternoon, and thank you so much.